In today's video, we're going to be working on this beautiful vintage cocktail cabinet. We're going to completely refinish the inside and jazz it up on the inside. There's a little sneak peek for you. So let's jump straight into it. First job to tackle is dismantling everything. So I'm going to take my trusty little Bosch screwdriver and get to work on removing everything. Now I'm going to guess that that is stuck on there because I have taken the screws out, so I use a little blunt force to remove it. And the reason I'm going to just go straight in with a hammer is because we're going to decoupage up here. If I wanted to keep this veneer, then probably the best thing for me to do would be to take a heat gun to loosen the glue, or not. Just a simple tap. Perfect. But if it was stuck on really well, if you just did that, it might pull the veneer off with it, and then you would have to do some patchwork. So yeah, if it was stuck on really well, heat gun, loosen the glue and then pull it off. With some of these screws where they're really rusty and crusty, sometimes it is better just to go in with a screwdriver as opposed to an electric screwdriver so that you don't completely tear up the heads of the screws. That's just the little maker's badge there, all in. So I'll see what I can find out about them. It's not one that I've come across before. Oh, that just shot across the room by pin. I like to keep a hold of these tags because I like to put them back as a nod to where they've come from. Oh, those are different. Look at those hinges. I've not seen those before on a cocktail cabinet I've worked on. Normally it's just the long piano hinge that goes all the way along. Those are quite fancy. Nope. Pliers to the rescue and out. Well, these screws are really rusty and crusty. I don't know if you can see that. Like they have been in there a long time. Oh, cool. Those can do with a good clean. Look at the grime behind there. That's pretty grim. This little ashtray is definitely reminiscent of a time gone by. Standing at your cocktail cabinet having a drink and a smoke. That will be coming out though. Then we have our first piece off. That was not soft plastic like I had anticipated. That was rather hard. There we go. Where there's a will, there's a way. Let's see if this one wants to play ball. No, it will cannot. And to get this ashtray out, there is a screw underneath here. Normally I'd be putting all my screws individually into baggies where they came from, so I knew where to put them back, but these screws are completely done for, so I'm going to change out all the screws anyway. And I've got the video footage to help me figure out what goes where, but I've done enough of these cocktail cabinets now to have a pretty good idea of how to reconstruct them. Unfortunately, with a lot of these older cabinets, you do sometimes just have to get a bit violent. No, of course it's not going to be easy. Now that it's all taken apart, I'm just going to flip it onto its back because one of the legs felt quite wobbly and I just want to check if any repairs need to be made. Oh yeah, you can see someone's already attempted to glue that leg there. And these are all really wobbly, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of them off and then re-glue them and re-screw them. Yeah, that is a mess, whatever someone's tried to do with that. So I'm going to need to get all of that off before I re-glue it. Now on to the other three legs. I'm going to give that a quick hoover, get rid of all the dust and spider eggs and spider webs. Right, now to get all this old glue off, I'm going to start with my painter's tool because that's really sharp, so see how we get on with that. Whilst these legs are off, I'm just going to give them a sand with 120 grit sandpaper, just because it's easier to work with them once they're detached from the piece, rather than re-glue them, then try and sand them. These are going to be painted, so I'm only giving them a scuff sand and removing some of that old varnish. Right, I'm going to get the legs reattached now. So I'm just going to use some wood glue. I'm just going to get that all over. And get there. I'm temporarily going to use these screws just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to get my big metal clamps and use that to secure it. Okay, that's applying a good amount of pressure. Just wipe that out. And then do the same with the other legs.
One day later.
It is cold in here today. Get some heat going. At least the sun is shining. But yeah, it's like 1 degree. So it is pretty icy in here. Let's see how our legs fade up. Right, let me put my stuff down and then we'll have a look. Right, so I think where it's so cold in here, the glue hasn't set properly yet. You can see it's still wet there, but I do need to carry on working on this. So I'm going to screw some nails into the legs, which I've done there. I'm going to do that on all 4 corners to shore up the legs. This is going to have wallpaper over it. So here you're not going to be able to see it because I've recessed them, sunk them, and the paper will go over it. So that'll make sure that the legs are super stable and that the glue, when it dries, has made really good contact. So let's get on with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is drill some pilot holes. I've got a screw in there already which was holding it. So I just need to remove that first before drilling another screw into it. Right, so I'm going to make sure I go into a part of the wood that hasn't already had the screw hole made into it, so it makes the best connection possible. So around about here. Well, yeah, that didn't glue properly, did it? Okay, bigger problem, glue didn't work, so let's revisit. So I don't know if it's the cold, but that glue hasn't set properly between the leg and the base. So I'm going to scrape all of that off, re-glue, and then add those screws. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so that's being held in place now. And now I can get to drilling the pilot holes and adding those screws. See, it's these really chunky ones that I'm putting in that are going to make sure this does not move at all. I'm going to go in with a bigger pilot hole. There's just too much resistance. It's futile. Right, let's try that again. Oh, for fuck's sake. Of course, those holes are too big now. So I've got this little dowel rod. And what I'm going to do is just squeeze that into the space, let it dry and re-drill. So I'll go as far as it'll let me. Chop that off and then do the same with the other one. So I'm going to leave that to dry now, and I'm just not going to be able to move on with the stripping today until everything's dried and shored up, which is a bit of a pain, but it is what it is. Okay, hopefully the second time's a charm, and I'm just gonna, right, so now I can drill those pilot holes again and we can get those legs screwed in. Let me just double check this isn't the one that's too big. Oh, that was a lucky check. Otherwise, I would have just done the same thing again. Now that that is nice and solid, I'm going to flip this over, take the back off and work on the back legs in the same way. I can now attempt to remove this. Okay, good. That is off. That was already broken, so no major loss there. Put that to one side. And now I can get to here to drill down into the legs. Last night, off camera, I ended up having to do some more gluing, and it was easier just to get on with it off camera. So this is the current situation. I've got to remove all these clamps and see what we're working with, and then it'll be time to start removing the finish, finally. So this bit along here, this is what snapped off and where the issue was. So hopefully it's all dried up now. And I wasn't too worried about any glue squeeze out specifically, just because it's all gonna get sanded down. To start, I'm gonna use a worn 80 grit sandpaper and try and remove some of this finish with sandpaper rather than use stripper and introduce more liquid. I want to see if I can get it off with just sanding. So I'm applying very little pressure and I'm getting the sander to do the work. I've got the bulk of that top varnish layer off, so now we're going to move to 120 grit. that's that mostly done now. And whilst I had it on its side, I just scuff sanded down there because that needs to be roughed up ready for the decoupage paper. But what I'm going to do now, before I do a final finish sand, is I'm just going to do any repairs, any wood fill that I need to do. I'm going to do that now. And then these little holes here, this is not active woodworm, so I'm not worried about that. So I just need to fill in all of those bits first. For the wood filler, I'm just going to be using this Ronseal High Performance. It's just a 2-part, so wood filler and hardener, and then that'll be a really strong version of wood filler because it's epoxy based. So this is in the color of natural, so let's mix some up and get some applied. There we go. This is really stinky stuff. I'm just going to take that and that little bit of the hardener. Give that a good mix. Right, that's ready to go. And then all along this seam where I glued it back together, I'm just going to make sure that that's filled in. The other side is done, so now we're going to go through the same process with this side, 120 to 180. This is the paint stripper that I am going to be using. I'm just going to apply it with a cheap chip brush. As you can see, it's like this white gel type consistency. And because it's a water-based eco stripper, it's not going to be as effective as a chemical stripper, but it's much easier clean up, a lot less toxic. So let's see how we get on. I'm applying a fairly generous layer. There's not as much damage on this side, so I feel a bit more confident with using this water-based stripper on this side. It's not particularly warm in here, so I'm not worried about this drying out. I'm not going to cover it up. I'm just going to leave it for 20 minutes or so, see what it does. And I think probably what I'll do is I'll do the same with the doors and the other bits from the cabinet, 80 grit the varnish off, and then let the stripper work on what's left. Right, let's leave that to do its thing. I've given it plenty of time. I don't think leaving it any longer would do any more. So let's scrape back and see what we're left with. And I can already see, if you can see there, that is still varnish on there. So it's not worked as well as I had hoped, but we'll probably have a lot less sanding to do. So let's carry on scraping and see what we're left with. The stage I'm at now, everything's had a scuff sand. Where I attached the legs at the bottom here and then used some wood filler just to even it out, that's now dried and I've sanded that back smooth. The outsides, sanded. This is where we did the wood filler repair. So I can scuff sand all of that, but outside is what I do last. So I work from the inside out. And I find that is best because you start with the paper, then you do the gold edging. And if any of that gold edging comes onto the outside wood, then you've got an opportunity to sand it down before you apply your finish. So that can all get done. I'm just gonna spray everything over with some water, wipe it down, get rid of all that sanding dust, and then we'll start decoupaging the paper to the inside. And this was a great little Facebook Marketplace find yesterday. I managed to get all of these wood veneers for 20 quid. So there's plenty there when I need to do veneer repairs. So very pleased with that. The paper that my client chose for this is Grand Deco Life in the pattern Jungle Fever. So let's open that up and I'll show you what it looks like. It's this really cool tropical leafy print with lots of vibrant colors. So that's it there. It's got the monkey and the birds. Wow, that is stunning. And it's set against that navy background. So I'll start at the bottom and work my way up. As always, I'm going to start with a fresh blade so that I get the best cut. And this paper doesn't go all the way to the edge, so I will have to cut a sliver to make sure the pattern continues all the way. So I'll start by cutting this piece to size. The glue I'm going to be using is this Bond Contractor PVA. So I'm just going to brush a bit onto the back of the paper, not too much, because I don't want to waste too much glue squeezing out. Oh my days. If I can get it open, that is. Does anyone find that these push and twists are as much against adults as they are against children? I can never open them. Anything? No. Oh, finally. So, just pop a small amount on the back and spread it round. And then I'm going to do the same with the surface. Now I'm going to cut it along this line here because this is where the door comes in and I don't want it impeding on the door movement. I'm just going to glue up to there, making sure to get all those edges so they have good contact, good adhesion. And because you've put glue on both sides, there is some movement. You can slide it around. Now I'm just going to cut around this stopper. And that's why it helps to have a fresh, sharp blade so that you can do these precise cuts. And then just a ruler to cut it along that front edge. Right, now I'm going to take a wallpaper smoother and smooth it out. So pushing out any excess glue, any air bubbles. And this makes sure it's got a really good adhesion to the surface. And don't worry about any glue squeezing out because we need to seal in the wallpaper, so we're going to put a layer of glue over top of it anyway. So you can just take that glue that has squeezed out and pop it over like that as your first coat of sealer. Get your edges there. While I'm here, I'm just going to trim the back as well. Okay, and now I need to cut that small piece over there for the pattern. Just like with the other piece, we'll and use any squeeze out just to go over top. And that's the process I'm going to follow going up. Okay, so I didn't know this, but apparently if you use PVA glue in below 5 degrees, it dries white, which kind of makes sense because it's water-based. But now I need to fix this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my heat gun and my mister bottle, and I'm going to heat it and mist it with water to reactivate the glue, see if it dries clearer, and I'll put my heater in here as well to keep it a bit warmer. So let's try that. So it's going to be a fine balance between heating it up. I can already see it like starting to go. Right, that's looking a ton better. Might just run a brush over it as well. Okay, perfect. That's worked a treat. So let's carry on doing that to all the sides. Okay, let's work on these two now. So I'm going to start by warming them up. Then we spritz a little water and go in with the heat gun again. And then just keeping that heat gun moving continuously. Spritz again and a little rub with the cloth. And then again with the heat. Right, so those are looking normal again, thank goodness. It's all looking fine. So, panic over. I was worried that I was going to have to strip it all back and start again. But I guess with experience, you know, if this had happened to me in my first 6 months of doing furniture, I would have completely freaked out, not known what to do, and just stopped, put it to the side. But now, 3 years in, I kind of not so phased by it. Like I come in, I think, oh, this might be a problem, but you troubleshoot first and you try different things, and it's not a disaster until it actually is a disaster. So yeah, really pleased with that. I'm just gonna have to glue a couple of edges, which is normal anyway. And now we can move on to putting all the gold detailing on. As I said before, I prefer to move inside out, and that gives the cleanest finish on all the different parts. So let's move on to gold details. So that edge there, I'm just going to be using this CA glue. I'm just going to pop some on there and then push it, and then down there as well. I'm not too worried about the squeeze out because I'm just going to sand that. I just want to make sure it's adhered well. This side seems to be all okay when I rub my finger along the edge. I'm just going to move on to these bits now. That's all I can see to glue down at the minute, but more might become apparent as I go through the sanding of the edges. So I'm going to start working on the sanding, and if that reveals any other areas that need gluing, that's what I'll do, and then we'll move on to the gold detailing. I'm just going to grab my handheld sanding block, and what's on here, 240, so I'm going to stick a used 120 grit on there, so it's probably a bit more like 180, and then I'll start sanding the edges. And as you can see, it just gives a really nice flush finish. So nice and flush, and now ready for the gold. That little corner there needs some attention now. And I'm just going to do the same again on this side. My client wants a gold that isn't too blingy, so we've opted for rub and buff in European gold. It's a much nicer, bronzier kind of gold. So I'm just gonna get some on a bit of cloth and start working that in. Now it's not too much of a problem if I go over the edge here because I'm working inside out. If I do get any gold here, I can just lightly sand it off before I apply my finish. So that's good for a first layer. I'm just going to do the same over here. And I'm using a cloth to apply it just so that I can really work it into that wood grain as I'm applying it. And then I'll leave this to dry for probably 24 hours. And then I'll come back in with the second coat. And another good thing about doing it this way, where you've sanded the paper, this gold covers up that white edge. So that gives you a nice finish as well there. I'm just going to have a quick check along the wallpaper edge to make sure that the gold hasn't gone over. So I don't know if you can see how it just gives a really nice brass toned gold finish to it, rather than like a really blingy bright gold. It might not look like much right now, but my plan with this section here is I'm going to make sure that these are solid gold. So I've only just applied a thin first coat, and then I'll go in with the second coat. Then I'm going to put a little bit of epoxy down each one just to seal it in, and then that would be quite a hard wearing surface in these little recesses here. And then I'm going to decoupage this with wallpaper and then just cut out the holes. So we'll leave that to dry now. All the rest of it, the gold needs to dry overnight in those pieces there. And then we can come back tomorrow and possibly move on to, well, first of all will be the second coat of gold, and then depending how that goes, maybe adding top coat to the outside. I'm ready to start getting top coat on the outside. So here where there might be a little bit of gold that's overlapped onto the grain, I'm gonna go in with my sanding block and 180 grit sandpaper, that's what I've got on there, and I'm just gonna give it a very light sand just to smooth it out and just make sure that any of the gold that may have come over the edge is gone. And I'm going to work my way top down. Along the side, I did some wood glue repairs and then patched with some wood filler. So now I'm just going to go in with my sander and sand all of that smooth. I'm going to be using 240 grit sandpaper. I finished that off with some hand sanding, and now I'm just going to wipe away all the dust with some mineral spirits. Now, if you look, you can clearly see there's some areas that still need some additional sanding, like that spot down there as well. So with the dry wood, it looked okay, but then once you add those mineral spirits, it really highlights areas that still need some work. So I'll wait for that to dry and then I'll sand that down again. That one especially. There's just a few areas where there are chips in the veneer. So I'm going to use this hot tool, which is used for cutting styrofoam normally, or foam. So I'm going to use that and a walnut fill stick. And I'm just going to fill those areas in. And then I'll sand that back once it's fully cured. And there's just 2 spots over there as well. Okay, so I'll leave those to dry fully and set now. A few spots that need the touch-up pen over there. I'm just using the Mohawk brush tip markers. And I'll start with a relatively light one and then build up. Take a slightly darker one just to get some lines in. And I think that's probably enough. That once the finish is on it, you won't be able to really see. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with how the gold looks in those recessed areas. So now I'm going to take this epoxy resin kit and I'm going to mix it up and pour just enough in the bottom to cover it to protect the wax. So we've got clear epoxy resin A and B, some stirring sticks, some gloves I imagine, and the 2 separate cups. These are going to be my A and B measurements, obviously. So now I just need to get a little cup that I can pour this into once I've measured. Okay, so let's start with A. And I'm going to pour the full 30 ml because I think I'm going to need a fair bit to do all the bottoms. Okay, that's more like 25. So now I'll do the same with B. Okay, that is equal parts. Let's pop them both in that mug and give them a good old mix. I don't think this was the best cup to do it in because the sides are just collapsing where it's sticking to it. So I'm just going to keep mixing until it goes clear because it's kind of cloudy and bubbly. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, I've mixed and mixed and mixed and mixed. It hasn't gone clear, but I don't think I can mix any more. So I want it just to cover the base to give it a bit of protection. Now it says that it is self-leveling, so I will trust that it is and move on to the next one. Oh my gosh, too much. And don't panic. You see all this epoxy going, this is all going to be covered with wallpaper, so I'm not too worried about not messing up the wood part at the minute. Just pushing it all into the corners as well. And if I think it's just a bit too much, like if it's really pooling up in those corners, then I'm just going to remove some of that excess because I really want it to be a sort of a thin layer as opposed to a thick layer of epoxy. Okay, I think you get the idea, so I'm just going to crack on and do this and show you how it is once I'm all done unless something goes horrifically wrong, and then I'll bring you in as well. I've finished pouring the epoxy. I had to make a couple more batches to get it all done. I've checked that the cabinet is sitting straight so that when the epoxy dries, because it's self-leveling, it'll dry flat. And I've also checked that way as well. I don't know if you can see. So the bubble is in the middle there and in the middle there. So cabinet is straight. And what I'm going to do now is just get my heat gun and go over the epoxy just to get rid of any air bubbles that might be there before it starts to set. I'm just going to use it on the low setting. I could just see some spots where the epoxy hasn't gone, so I just want to move it around whilst I'm here. Don't know if you'll be able to see the air bubbles bursting. Okay, I think I've done about all I can do. So now I just need to leave it to set. This was the side of the cabinet that needed some more sanding. If you remember when I was spraying it with mineral spirits, you could still see marks on it. So I've gone over that now with some hand sanding, and I'm just going in and I'm going to be touching up those areas with wood filler, and I'm just going to be using the Mohawk pens to do that. So just initially covering up that stark white against the wood grain. There's another little spot over there. And then I'll put some top coat on, and anything else that still needs covering up, we'll go in and do some additional touching up. I'm just using the lightest color just to do this initial touch up so that there won't be too stark of a difference once I put the top coat on, and it'll be easier to blend in. And just doing long sort of feathering strokes just to imitate what wood grain would be like. So I'm not drawing over it like this, colouring it in like a picture, because that wouldn't resemble natural wood grain. It's just soft strokes to create those lines that you would see in natural wood grain. And look at what direction your wood grain is going in and follow that. Don't go opposite to what the wood grain is already moving in, because that's not going to blend in at all. There's a bar that comes across here, so I'm not too worried about getting that all blended in. This top part here is probably the bit that's going to show, and I can always touch that up more once I've put top coat on and I have reattached the bar and I know what bits are going to be showing. Sort of see the line to there, so I don't think it'll be much more than that. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Whilst I've got the cabinet on the table, I'm going to put gold wax on the legs. So I'm just using Rub and Buff in European Gold and paintbrush that I always use for my gold, and then just applying that on there. I have scuff sanded these and wiped them down with mineral spirits. I'm just going to go over and make sure there's a nice even coat all over the legs. I'm going to do all in here, underside and on the other side, so that if the customer ever moves the cabinet and picks it up and looks underneath, it looks finished. You don't want them picking it up, looking underneath, and it's sort of half done and untidy. And if one coat isn't enough, just leave this one to dry and set for a couple of hours, and then come back with a second coat. I'm going to apply the first coat of hard wax oil to the cabinet now. So I'm just using Fiddy's hard wax oil in satin. Give that a good shake, and I'm just going to use a foam brush to apply it. And you don't want to apply a really thick, heavy coat. You just want thin coats. So I'm just applying it in a circular motion just to get it in the wood grain. And then I'll come back over in the direction of the wood grain. I'm going to work on the sides now, just doing the same thing. Just be careful with the edges because you don't want it pooling up over there because you've already applied the gold, and so you don't want blobs of oil collecting on there. So just pulling that down and spreading it out again in the direction of the wood grain. Okay, that side is done. And now I'm just going to move on to the other side. So yesterday I was working on stenciling inside of the doors, and I was using the rub and buff wax that I've been using on the rest of the piece, and some of it came out okay, and I've been using these screen print stencils that I ordered off Amazon, which I haven't used before. Normally I just use the plain cutout stencils, but this one's got like a mesh, which is great because it's a lot neater, the finish. But I think where I've been using wax, the first two were fine, those came out really nicely. The second two I did were not as clear, and I think the wax was sort of clogging up the screen mesh, and so it was getting harder to go through. So I popped to Hobbycraft yesterday and I've bought this Enamel Paint gold leaf, and in theory this plus the scraper should get better results for the screen stenciling. So I've got one here that I haven't used, and I've prepped the other door. So we're going to try with the enamel paint and see how that works, and if that works out well, then I'll just lay the stencil over this door with the wax and go over that with the enamel so it's the same color. So let's get started. This is a fast dry enamel, so I am going to need to work fairly quickly. So this is a reusable stencil. It's got a self-adhesive back, and it says that it can be reused up to 15 times and washed as well. So as you can see there, it's got that mesh through the cutout bits. And I've not worked with ones that are that screen type. So let me just make sure they're aligned the same so that the pattern, so that's the mirror image. And I've done just a little border around the side for a clean finish. So I'll press that down. Let's open this up. I've not worked with this before, so I'm not sure what to expect. Okay, so that's a lot more liquidy than obviously my wax is, so I think that should be a lot better at going through the print, the screen, I mean. If you can see it there. So I'm just going to mix that up. Okay, and I'm just going to get my scraper that I bought ready, and hopefully the finish is as neat as it was when I was using the wax. So I'm just going to do that. So let's try that. So all I'm doing is just really pushing it through that screen. And this is fast dry, so I do need to work quite quickly. Okay, for the moment of truth, let's lift it up and see what's happened. Fingers crossed. Oh, looking promising so far. Oh, that's much better. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. So I'll move on now and do the next bit. Just trying to be really careful not to smudge what I've already done. Just gonna push it down with the scraper to try and stick it in place. Let's go again. I'll move you in closer so you've got a better view. I'll come in and wipe that. I just want to get it laid down first. I want to go ahead and lay the wallpaper down, adhere that now. So I've pre-cut my paper to roughly the right size and that strip there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue it down, let it dry fully, and then cut the holes out because I want the paper to be stiff when I do the cutting so that it doesn't rip and tear. Now I'm going to go in with wood glue rather than PVA glue. I want something that's, well, just a bit thicker than PVA glue, because when I squeeze the paper down, I don't want it all running into the recesses. So just making sure to spread the glue all over nice and evenly so that all the edges of the paper are stuck down. Okay, I'm just going to tape up some of that gold so I've got a nice straight line to work with and that the glue doesn't run over where I don't want it to go. That is low tack tape, so it's not going to take the wax off, hopefully. I'll have a nice straight line where the paper meets the gold, hopefully, in theory. Just going to wipe the areas where the glue has come down into the recess. Okay, now I'm going to pop the paper down. Now I'll get my smoother. And then I'm just going to pop some PVA glue over the paper just to seal it in and make sure that it's nice and stiff when I come to cut it. There we go. I'll leave that to dry overnight now. I'm going to go in and start slicing out the recesses now. So I'm just going to feel where the hole is and make a cross incision and then push it down along the edge so that I can clearly see where I need to cut. Just go with a bit of a sharper blade actually. I wanted to have a nice polished finish. So what I've done is I've taped up an even edge around everything. And I'm just going in with that same gold wax and just giving it a quick coat of the gold wax, just so that that edge is nicely finished and everything looks neat and tidy. If there's any that goes over the edge, I'll just get a little cloth and just wipe that. You could just spray a little bit of mineral spirits onto your cloth, which will remove that wax. I think I'm going to get another brush because I think that one might have had it now. I'm just going to use this one, which is a bit denser. It's an old makeup brush. But yeah, that's much better. Hopefully you can see just how nicely it's finishing off the edges. I've finished going round with the gold wax, so now I'm just going to gently remove the tape. There's some areas where it's pulled up the wax, where it's pulled up the varnish underneath. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some acrylic spray in satin, and I'm just going to spray it all with that to seal in what's there. I might just go over it with the hoover quickly. Right, then and I'll just leave that to dry now. This is where I've settled on. After I did the epoxy, I just didn't like how shiny it was. It just didn't fit with the vibe of the rest of the cabinet. So I took that same gold wax and I stippled it over the top. And now it's given it sort of a shimmery gold watery look. And I think that looks a lot nicer and in keeping with the rest of the piece. See, I'm happy with how that's turned out now. I don't really want to show you too much more of the cabinet now because I think that might ruin the final surprise, the final reveal. So what I'll do is, here's a couple of clips of how it looked before, just as a reminder. And this is how it looks now. Enjoy. Let me know what you think in the comments below.